When Joseph Banks reached the age of 21, he inherited estates in Lincolnshire, Staffordshire, Derbyshire and Sussex, yielding an income in excess of £6,000 per year. For comparison, Philip Miller, that great gardener of Chelsea Physic Garden, received £50 per year, and Dr Johnson's £300 allowed him to keep a house in London with many dependents. Captain James Cook, over the 3-year Endeavour voyage, received less than £300, and a farm labourer would be very lucky to receive £25. It gave Banks the opportunity to practice improvements in agricultural methods and animal husbandry. However, he was not limited to farming methods to gain improvement, and spent large efforts and considerable sums of his own money to sponsor Acts of Parliament for the building of canals and turnpike roads in Lincolnshire. This included enclosures and the drainage of large tracts of the Lincolnshire Fen. The foundation for this future path and his eventual contributions to Lincolnshire had already been set. His next voyage would give him the knowledge to deliver this, and it was not the Endeavour voyage. Young Joseph Banks would have been well aware of the importance of water both in and to a landscape, and its importance to the local economy. These would have been impressed upon him while he was still young, and the facilities provided by the flooded fens surrounding his father's estate at Revesby would have been a source of entertainment for fishing and botanising on his frequent visits during school holidays. Joseph's grandfather had been an early promoter in attempts to drain some of the land and had been an active supporter of the project to canalise the River Witham. His father William, although confined to a chair, still attended to his favourite business of drainage. This culminated after his death in the 1762 Witham Act. All of these works would have been carried out while young Joseph was growing up and would have been a part of his early introduction to the importance of water and drainage. Given this background, it is not surprising then that Joseph's journal of the journeys that he made to various parts of the country at that time contain observations and recordings of the waterways, both natural and canalised, which he saw. In 1767, when he was 24, he made 2 journeys, first to the Bristol area and then to Wales and northwest England. Both journeys were undertaken to visit friends. On these trips, Joseph kept detailed journals of all he saw, and these are extremely valuable documents today, for in them occur the earliest record of Banks writing about waterways. On the 24th of May 1767, he arrived in Chepstow and stayed overlooking the River Wye. He must have noticed the similarity of the small river port to the Lincolnshire port of Boston, not only with regards to its physical location at the mouth of a navigable river, but also to its trade. During this trip, he also observed the improvements of Valentine Morris, who was a promoter of turnpike roads. Morris described the roads in Monmouthshire prior to his turnpikes as ditches. This would have struck the young Joseph Banks as being very similar to the roads in South Lincolnshire at that time. The main series of Lincolnshire Acts for turnpike trusts came between 1755 and 1765, when an average of 1 trust each year was set up, covering more than 180 miles of road. Sir Joseph Banks was an example of some of the early larger investors. He put money into the Sleaford, Tattershall and Grimsby trusts. In the winter of 1767, Joseph embarked on the second of his trips In particular, he visited the counties of Lancashire and Cheshire. In November, he sees great improvements on the Dee estuary by the building of embankments on the marshes. Again, he compared this landscape with that of his home county. His travel continued for a further month until the approach of Christmas, and with the journal entry, "We set out for Worsley with Mr. Gilbert, that I might see the Duke of Bridgewater's navigation." So began a few days of intense canal observation. These recordings are of great interest today, as Sir Joseph set down within them on the earliest eyewitness accounts of canals under construction. On his journey to Worsley, he saw the Hare Castle Tunnel on the Trent and Mersey Canal just prior to its opening. He expressed his doubts about the quality of the construction, saying that the mortar is so soft and seems to have so little care taken in making it, but I cannot help having my fears of accidents, which may befall it when it comes to bear a large weight of hill. This observation was reinforced half a century later, when the engineer John Rennie, commenting 2 months after Banks' death, told the proprietors of the Trent and Mersey of the poor workmanship here, and that the whole structure had been made with bad mortar. On the 19th of December, he came upon the Bridgewater navigation at Dunham, the seat of Lady Stamford. Joseph was so impressed with what he saw that he wrote a full account of his visit, including descriptions of the building of an embankment. When he saw it, 21 miles of the 30 from Worsley to Runcorn and the branch to Manchester had been completed. He had seen how the digging had been carried out, how the stonework was laid, and would have learned much about canal construction in general, for he had been in the hands of a good instructor, John Gilbert, the Duke of Bridgewater's agent. The advantages of canals and the problems of water supply would have been discussed at length with John Gilbert, and this information talked and thought about with reference to his Lincolnshire estates and the South Lincolnshire area generally. During this phase, Banks was learning the rudiments of canal construction, although what he was gaining was practical rather than theoretical knowledge. It was some time, and with the distraction of 2 major expeditions, before we see Banks' interest in canals revisited. His appointment as President of the Royal Society in 1778 put him at the centre of the British scientific community. He was now in touch with everything that was presented for discussion or opinion to the Society, and he showed great interest in anything connected with waterways, and he had a general awareness of the future importance of canals. It was Abe Theodore Augustine Mans, whose treatise on rivers and canals, that was to complete Sir Joseph Banks' knowledge and understanding of the many laws of hydrology. Banks presented this paper on behalf of Mans to the Society on the 24th of June 1779. He could not have failed to grasp this opportunity to increase his understanding, and thus by the middle of 1779 Banks possessed both a practical experience and a growing theoretical knowledge which would enable him to make such valuable contributions to the buildings of waterways in the future, and thus the general improvements of roads, These and the general improvement of roads would provide a transport infrastructure to service Britain's growing industrial output. In Lincolnshire, Sir Joseph's knowledge of waterways and hydrology came to the fore when he chaired meetings in the county that brought about the drainage of the east and west Wildmoor Fens that lied south of his Revesby estate. It is here that we see him bringing together both his practical and theoretical knowledge on the ground, culminating in the drainage of the east and west Wildmoor Fens and the building of canals in Lincolnshire. Those canals and turnpikes include improvements to the River Witham, the draining of the East and the West Fen, the Sleaford navigation, the Horncastle navigation, the River Welland, the Stamford Junction Canal, the Louth Canal and the Grantham Canal. In 2015, Dr. Mark Spencer, who was at that time the senior curator of the Natural History Museum, sent me a picture of a plant collected in Lincolnshire by Joseph Banks in 1795. The plant, Potamogeton acutifolius, or sharp-leaf pondweed, was an aquatic, and as an aside had only just survived the London Blitz, having been burnt at the edges when the Natural History Museum was bombed. This plant has led me to evidence which shows conclusively that Banks was hands-on at a very early stage in the drainage of the East and West Fen. The paper by R.C. Wheeler, Sir Joseph Banks and the Draining of the East, West and Wildmoor Fen, dated 2007, contains within it a reference to Banks being on the ground at Cherry Tree Corner when the line of the Catchwater drain was set in October 1795. Those dates are interesting. Wheeler references this from the minutes of the 4th District Commissioners dated the 30th of October 1795. Cherry Tree Corner was within a few hundred yards of North Dyke Bridge where the plant was discovered. Joan Gibbons records Banks collecting Potamogeton acutifolius within the floor of Lincolnshire and dates it in 1795. It is a tribute to his botany skills. This is an aquatic, quite hard to see, and Banks would have had to have actually gone into the dyke to extract it. Not only did Banks take a hands-on role in surveying the fens, he then went on to instruct the engineer John Rennie. This adds weight to my belief that Banks had learned enough about construction and hydrology to help plan drainage schemes and build canals in Lincolnshire. The Drainage Acts were passed in 1801 with amendments in 1803. Work commenced in 1802 and took 8 years, employing many men. Rennie's grand drainage scheme was carried out and remains little changed to this day. On his early tours of the West Country, Banks not only met Matthew Bolton, but also Captain James Keir and Dr. William Small. Keir was a Scottish chemist, geologist, inventor and industrialist, while Small was a Scottish scientist, professor and medical doctor. They would become leading lights in the Lunar Society, a prestigious club of scientists and industrialists with which Banks had close connections. Initially, the club held meetings in one another's houses, often at Matthew Bolton's home in Birmingham or Erasmus Darwin's house in Lichfield. They demonstrated scientific discoveries to each other, discussed how these discoveries could be translated into new products or industries, and they described practical problems they had encountered in their everyday activities. The Lunar Men, as they were called, were very keen to devise accurate methods of measurement. The members of the group with manufacturing interests were especially aware of the importance of having precise weights and measures. The members also wanted transport to be improved, especially by the building of canals. And many of them invested in canal companies. Banks was a frequent visitor to the society meetings and was well acquainted with its members, most of whom he corresponded with, and many, of course, were also fellows of the Royal Society. It is drainage and the movement of water which in later life again linked Joseph Banks with Matthew Bolton, and subsequently with other engineers and manufacturers of the day. Banks and Bolton had already established good relations when Banks, as a shareholder of the Gregory Mine in Derbyshire, involved himself in the completion and commissioning of a Bolton Watt engine to pump water in the mine. And this engine was to be completed in 1782. Banks' work in Lincolnshire was also perhaps causal to national and international affairs. It was the attempt to improve the quality of Lincolnshire's sheep that led to Banks alighting on the importance of merinos, which then became, even in his lifetime, so important to the history of Australia. Judges in Lincolnshire, of whom Banks was one, also sent convicts to the 13 colonies and then to Australia. However, to return to our young Joseph Banks, here then was a young man on the cusp of fame, about to set out on a voyage of exploration and discovery with Captain James Cook on Her Majesty's bark Endeavour. This young man was formed in the fields of Lincolnshire and considered it his home county. In later life, he did much to improve the infrastructure of the county through the building of roads and canals, and it was he who had the vision to create thousands of acres of new productive land in the county, and who introduced many improvements in agriculture and husbandry. It was his great estates in Lincolnshire, and especially Revesby, that were the engines of his prosperity, and that he used so generously for the benefit of others and his country. And to quote Howard B. Carter, "Truly the lands of Lincolnshire can seldom have yielded an income so well bestowed in the public interest in its widest sense as that which passed for so long through the hands of the fourth and last Joseph Banks of Revesby Abbey."